You're listening to Being Built, where innovators and tech leaders share stories about how building product builds them along the way. I'm your host, Aaron Davis. Okay, Steve Worrell, you run Riverain.
I do.
So the name of your product is the Clear...
So we have two product lines. We have what we call ClearRead X-ray and ClearRead CT.
Okay.
So X-ray being the modality, right? So basically two-dimensional image projection of your body, for example, your chest onto a two-dimensional image versus a CT, which is actually a three-dimensional image.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's back it up a little bit to like the purpose of the whole thing. And you just got to meet my wife. Her father suffered, unfortunately, from lung cancer, and you guys are fighting that fight, right? I mean, that's the whole, like I was reading about your mission.
Yep.
And your mission is a big one, to save lives.
It is. And so I think, you get a lot of satisfaction out of developing technology that ultimately impacts patients, impacts our direct customer, which is generally the radiologist. And so, but a bigger and bigger problem today is that, based on demographics, aging population, fewer and fewer radiologists. And so what is happening, that ratio of, data that needs to be interpreted to the number of readers, it just keeps growing, right? So they need tools that make them more efficient so they can get through more patients in a shorter period of time, but you can't compromise accuracy in that process. And so you have to have tools that both make them more efficient, but also at a minimum, keep them on par, but ideally even further improve their accuracy,
that was going to be my question. So like, does your tool improve, does it actually improve the accuracy if all the time in the world was provided, or is it more about being able to do the same faster?
No, so we actually did both, right? So the way we built the product, we sort of knew that we needed, from a practical perspective, in order to really get adoption, you needed to provide a tool that didn't slow them down, right? But you couldn't speed them up, while sort of not improving their what's called sensitivity and specificity. Sensitivity is like how given a lung cancer is present, how consistently does the device detect it? That's sensitivity. And then specificity is how commonly do you call a false positive, right? How commonly does the machine say something's a lung nodule or lung cancer when in fact it's not? It's just normal anatomy. And so
I guess you'd rather err that direction, but you can't be excessive or just waste time. Right?
Exactly, 100%, right? So it's kind of like the proverbial the bull who cries the wolf.
Yeah.
If you're constantly throwing false positives, users just they'll not use it.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we were able to demonstrate that we both improved their reading speed, but also improved their detection rate.
Okay.
So we, basically both axes, and they're sort of competing with one another, right? But we were able to achieve both and demonstrate
really
both.
Cool. Yeah, so like a lot of people doing AI work or whatever, their mission of their work or the actual output is to like sell advertisements or whatever, right?
Right.
But you guys are involved in something big, which is really cool. I mean, you're on the front line of saving lives, more or less, like providing tools that life-saving mitigations, that those practitioners need.
They do, and it's very much being embraced at this point.
Is that right? Good.
Yeah,
so you've kind of matured, high adoption.
Exactly, high adoption, and there was a period of time where I think radiologists felt threatened, right? Like you were trying to replace them, but we're many years away from that, right? So that human element is still very important. But you can sort of augment them and take away some and do some of the more mundane things for them, like measuring things or making sure that they don't overlook something because maybe they're trying to get through data so fast. They were distracted, right? That the cancer is hiding behind normal structures. And so you can, basically, provide both speed and accuracy while also mitigating some risk from a medical legal perspective.
So the users at this point they're embracing it? There's not a lot of like, we don't need that.
No, so
that's good. When we first met, it was a long time ago. I think you were running you weren't the CEO yet.
I was probably on the research side.
That's right. Okay, you were running research.
Yeah.
We were talking about some other colleagues of yours that I worked with at the time and such, and it was definitely not at this point where it was all well adopted and you were out there saving lives or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of cool. Like we chatted a little bit or whatever, but I hadn't heard, I didn't realize that you were at that point.
Yeah, so we actually got profitable in 2018.
Nice.
So we were, sort of making steady progress, right? And then in fall of 2019, we had an outside investor come in,
Okay.
and basically growth capital, right? So they wanted to accelerate the growth, and that sort of, that allowed us to, grow faster, make some critical hires, and kind of accelerate
awesome.
the commercialization of the products.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's a big. And so you kind of went through. You saw the organization through all of that, leading
did.
research.
I
and
did.
looking around the CTO.
Sort of the struggling startup.
Yeah. Wow.
Which-
That's a satisfying thing.
It was really satisfying. At the
And now you're like making customers happy, and they're helping to save lives.
Yeah, and so that's good. But every phase of, as you know, every phase of a company brings its own challenges, right? And so, in the early days, you're sort of, it's kind of, it's all about cash flow and trying to get to at least break even, hopefully get profitable.
Hey, you're counting nickels, man. I know all about that. I've run a couple of companies now, a couple of small startups or whatever now, and I realize how tight or how important managing cash can be, right?
Exactly.
So you did that whole dance. Huh?
I did that whole dance,
Wow.
which I look back on now, and those were really fun days, right? We had some great customers, some of the leading healthcare providers in the country, Duke Health, University of Chicago, MD Anderson, using the product every day, right? Every chest CT that gets acquired is read with our machine, right?
Wow. Okay. So you have a lot of, no doubt, you have a ton of case studies by now, and people who can like personally vouch for their experience using the technology.
More so on our user side, right? So meaning the radiologist. So we don't necessarily get to peer into the patients that it's affecting their lives. We know it's true, but we don't have that sort of intimate connection, if you will.
You're not following those cases to their end state or remission.
Right. But we hear from our users, right, that I'm confident I would not have seen that lung cancer had it not been for ClearRead CT.
Wow, really? I've had doctors tell you that.
Absolutely.
Like I would have missed that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Which is really cool.
Just got chills a little bit.
It really, I mean, and I think it's obviously everybody likes to put meaning behind their work, but I think that's one of the beauties of medical imaging or medical applications is that you truly are affecting people's lives, right, in a positive way. So it becomes a big motivator, right, for people to participate.
So you're in growth mode now. Then is that the most important part of what you're doing, or is there a lot of focus still on the product?
There's still a lot of focus on the product and even extending the product into other types of disease, right? So right now, the kind of our main product line is centered around lung cancer, but there's other types of opportunities to intervene earlier. For example, something called coronary calcium, which is an indicator of a person who is at risk for a heart attack. And so if a person's arteries has a high calcium count, that person is more likely to have a heart attack. And so we basically take a standard chest CT, right, and then the opportunity is to basically leverage that data as much as possible to find other types of disease beyond lung nodules, right? Coronary calcium, emphysema, COPD, all pulmonary embolisms, right? So all of these sort of, things that ultimately will kill people, you can extract, given a single CT, you can extract information and flag that condition so that then that person can, go on a path to recovery.
So would the CT be be trained on that problem, or
Yes.
would there have to be suspicion of that in the first? Okay,
It'll be trained on that problem. So you
Okay.
basically, it's called a use case, right? So a use case generally implies that you're targeting a particular disease,
Okay.
lung nodule, lung cancers, right?
Yeah.
Coronary calcium. So you build a solution that basically looks at the data and looks for the presence of those conditions.
Okay.
So each one is kind of its own very specialized objective, right?
Okay.
This model is looking for lung cancer. This model is looking for coronary calcium. This model is looking for emphysema,
Yeah.
right? But you can pull all that data from one exam.
Interesting. Okay. So, how does it work? Like, what makes it work?
Fundamentally, it uses machine learning, artificial intelligence. That's kind of the brains,
Okay.
right? And so basically what that means is you teach the algorithm to recognize certain conditions. And the way that you do that is you show it a lot of examples. So you basically have patients that have disease, you know where that disease is. So these are what's called retrospective cases, right? So you already know the outcomes, right? So these are old data.
Okay.
So
You're feeding the machine data as points.
You're feeding it, saying, here's where the lung cancer is. You know, you're basically teaching it to identify the location based on the characteristics of lung cancer.
Where's all that data come from?
Generally, you know, there's
Hospitals?
public data sets. So people do, for example, NIH creates public data sets,
okay.
and it'll have what's called ground
They're
truth.
just sharing it so innovators and so on.
Exactly. Yeah, and then we use simulation and modeling, where we can basically create synthetic disease and insert it into otherwise normal patients, right? So one of the challenges of machine learning is it's very data intensive, right? And generally speaking, acquiring data, ground truthing data is quite expensive.
Okay.
And so we've developed tools that allow us to augment measured data with simulated data so that we can more cost effectively sort of build out training sets
Okay.
and even capture conditions that may occur very infrequently, right? So, sometimes lung cancer.
Also, conditions for which there's not a lot of data.
Exactly, 100%.
Okay.
And that's a little bit of a secret sauce. We're kind of unique in
Don't
that
tell anybody.
it's secret sauce from the standpoint we know how important it is. We know it's an integral part of our development process.
Okay.
We actually talk about it in public a little bit, but it is incredibly powerful, right? And so that is something that we have developed over the years, somewhat out of necessity,
Yeah.
right? Because we didn't necessarily have the budgets to go buy.
You have a data set out there, or these tiny little incident or case or volume of incidents.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and people need to stay alive,
True.
not die from this stuff, right?
True.
Yeah, and it's almost like, lung cancer gets this like, oh, don't smoke, right? Or whatever. It gets this very different treatment than other
Does.
forms of cancer because everybody kind of associates it to this kind of sin
A behavioral thing that was your choice.
Yeah,
and-
right. So it's almost like it kind of gets a secondary prioritization, and I don't know if that's true in actual practice in healthcare.
No question. Smoking, either current or historical, is a huge risk factor.
Yeah.
But many people get lung cancer that never smoked,
Yeah.
right? They may have had secondhand smoke,
I just went to a benefit for a cousin who died of lung cancer and
never smoked.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and so but you're exactly right. There's a stigma,
Yeah.
and I that's very unfortunate, right? But I think that tide is changing in part because of education.
Sure.
The other factor that was true for a long time was that there was no evidence to prove that if I detected lung cancer early, that I would ultimately change the outcome.
Okay.
Then there was a big study in 2010, about a 10-year study that finally proved that if lung cancer screening took place, you could reduce morbidity by 20%.
Wow, that
So
much.
that was-
And that recently, like 12 years ago?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
And so that was
So until then, it was like early
what's the
detection,
point?
whatever. Right. Okay.
What's the point?
There was no consensus or clarity.
Unlike breast cancer, right, which
Right.
was what already proven.
For decades, we've known that like early detection was a mitigation.
And so we're still in early innings. I think so. The sort of adherence rate with respect to those people that qualify for lung cancer screening, roughly 10% of those are actually actively participating now in lung cancer.
10%.
10%.
So what would make them qualify? Like they're smokers of a certain age or something? Okay.
Exactly.
So only 10% of people who meet that very obvious criteria.
Even though it's reimbursed,
Yeah.
right? Even though it's reimbursed, the adherence rate is still quite low,
Yeah.
but it's accelerating quite quickly.
Is it? Okay.
Yep. And so I think in part that is still sort of an educational issue,
Sure.
right? Because
I can hear my uncle. He doesn't understand that like there are ways to stay ahead of that. Yeah, I think there's a crisis of conscience, I think, that happens there. It's like you kind of know. Yeah, that's an interesting battle to be fighting. Are you guys engaged in that at all in terms of like the adoption or the utilization of these?
not so much directly, although
Okay.
we're starting to have right. So a really important component of that education is the referring physician, the family doctor,
Okay.
right? Who has your history. She knows you're, for example, an ex-smoker. They know the guidelines, right? They encourage you to participate. That has been sort of an ongoing struggle, if you will, to sort of, have the referring physicians, the family doctor be proactive to the same degree that they are with breast cancer, colon cancer, right? But that's changing, right? And so what's interesting is that unlike many other types of cancer, in the case of lung cancer, is you can relatively simply sort of identify the portion of the populations at risk,
True.
right? And so therefore there is maybe even greater opportunity to have a more significant impact because I can better target.
Unlike breast cancer or whatever, which is mysterious, and yeah, that's right. It's half the population.
Exactly.
Lung cancer is particularly risky to a particular behaviors,
That's
right?
exactly
So
right.
age group, and
Age
whatever.
group and history. Have you had exposures, etc.?
I had a guest on the podcast recently who's engaged in doing outcome-based, essentially analyzing and producing data for insurers, a large insurer that administers Medicaid. So they're kind of getting into more like outcome-based reimbursements as opposed to like the fee-for-service kind of stuff,
Got
right?
it.
So
Yes.
it occurred to me as you're talking that the insurers would be very interested in getting ahead of these things,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That seems like a really intuitive marketing avenue because they want to reduce costs, right? Your mission is to save lives and grow the adoption.
And
of
generally
the
speaking, the earlier I detect it, right? One, the better the outcome, but two, also the less the less the total cost.
intervention, right? That's right. The
Exactly.
mitigations are less involved and less painful and
Yes. Yeah.
less expensive and less risky and all those things, right?
Right.
So,
It's good. Yeah, it's good. It's good from an economic standpoint. It's good from a patient outcome standpoint,
Yeah.
right?
yeah, the big evil insurance companies might actually be the good guys in that kind of stuff.
That's true, and they do reimburse CT screening now, right? And so it's still so that was a really pivotal step. Was that study, right? Which finally demonstrated that early detection does improve outcome, right? And then now, as you could probably well imagine, there's all sorts of studies that have been done in terms of what is the cost for treatment as a function of the
Sure.
stage,
Okay.
right?
So not just outcomes, but the costs associated with that.
Exactly.
Well, man, that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of different paths. I mean, the commercialization aspect of it, you have so many different stakeholders in healthcare, right? You have,
It's very complex. Yeah.
particularly with, I'm thinking about my uncle. He's like, don't tell me what to do, or whatever, right? Like you've got the family, you've got the patient, you've got the primary care provider, you've got the oncologist or whatever. You got all these, and you got
You got
the hospital and
the
the
budgetary
insurers.
process, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it can be quite challenging, and our experience is the critical sort of component to the sale, if you will, is sort of having that clinical champion. You need someone that sort of believes in the product, right, and sort of will go to bat for you, right, within the provider themselves, right. So,
Is that a radiologist, an oncologist? Who is that?
historically for us, it's been the radiologist.
Okay, because they're the ones who are reading these things, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, but then, if you're dealing with large health networks, right, then ultimately you may get engaged with the C-suite, right, because then the CFO or the chief medical officer, right, so you have to get everybody on board,
Yeah.
right, and that's the complexity of the sale.
Sure. So how much challenge is there at this point about the efficacy or the like does this even work? Like, are you facing that anymore, or is it more about dollars and cents and
So
changing processes or what?
I would say, it's I mean, there's still skeptics, if you will, but
Okay.
generally speaking, once customers use the product, then they're convinced, right? And so
Okay.
so
You
so
do free trials or what?
we do.
Do you?
We do get
Okay.
free trial.
You can't beat that price. Well, and you can. Why would you not? Like, you could just do it side by side because the alternative is just manually reading everything, right?
Yep.
So you could do your own kind of like anecdotal, I guess. I guess it would be somewhat scientific, but you can do your own study, right?
Right.
So like the next 100 reads or whatever, we'll just do both.
Yeah, and so they want to see publication. Sort of the purchasing decision is very multifaceted, right? So generally speaking, they like to see publications, peer-reviewed articles. We have those. Then another sort of consideration is they want to have, it's not unusual for a new customer to want to, be convinced on their own data. I want to see how it performs on my data, right? Because there's this healthy skepticism, right? And so and then
we want that.
right, and then they want to see how it integrates into their workflow,
Yeah.
right? Because anything that doesn't sort of seamlessly integrate into their workflow, they're not going to tolerate it.
Right. Yeah. So speaking of software, like how do you, what's the tech made out of? Do you have a good understanding of that, or because I know you're running the big picture, but
Yeah, so I kind of came from those roots, right? So I still sort of understand and relatively intimate with it, and so it's very multifaceted, and right. So the way that we build products, so we have what you might more like a research group, and then we have a development group, and so the research group tends to build basically prototypes.
Okay.
And so they might use more scripting languages
Okay.
to build prototypes, like a MATLAB or a Python,
Okay.
right? And so they build prototypes, and then once those prototypes are built and there's enough evidence, if you will, that these are ready for market, then you go into product coding, right? Then it's all about getting every ounce from an efficiency standpoint, right? Because you want to minimize runtime, right?
Okay.
So then some of that
it doesn't matter when you're just passing small bits of data. And,
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Or you got all day to run it. You can run it overnight,
Right.
but when you deploy it in a clinic,
Right. You don't have that.
you don't have that, right? Yeah, you got to turn around the case in 2 minutes or whatever. And so basically, you go through this prototype, sort of making sure that you built the right product in a prototype context. So we commonly build these prototypes, and then we'll provide these prototypes even to outside organizations, like Mass General Hospitals. We have a
Okay.
partnership with Mass General, so they'll basically take these prototypes, they'll test these prototypes on their own data. So it's not in patient care yet, right? It's sort of
Okay.
outside, kind of bench testing, but independent bench testing,
Okay.
right? To say, is it really ready?
Is it hard to get partners like that who will?
It can be. It can be a little expensive, right? But there are organizations out there that they want to do
Seems a
that.
little cumbersome, right? You get that slow tool. You're kind of doing us a favor
But
with this research.
they want to do publications.
Ah.
They want to be on the bleeding edge,
okay,
right?
okay.
And so that's sort of what their motivation
Okay,
is in
makes
part.
sense. That's helpful.
Yep. And then so they so they put it through its paces, make sure it's ready, Then you got to basically productize it. So now you basically have went through those two steps. You went through the prototype, you built the product. Now you got to get it ready for market, which means you got to go through a regulatory process, right? And that's the FDA. So they're going to scrutinize it, and very commonly you have to do a study, right? And that is submitted with your application for approval.
So how much does your product have to change before it's required to go through that whole rigorous?
There's guidelines. There's guidelines. So it's there's kind of like a tree diagram that says depending on the nature of the change, you may or may not have to resubmit to the FDA.
Interesting.
But generally speaking, once you get that,
I guess it's the same way in drugs. I mean, it's like you're allowed to.
It's very much like drugs.
Yeah, you're allowed to change the skin or whatever. Like you can make little micro changes that don't impact the actual.
That's exactly right. But if you want to
change the way it works,
or change the population, right? So now all of a sudden, I want to apply.
Same tool, different use.
I want to apply COVID vaccine to children.
Okay.
Right, so now I got to do another submission. I got to study the effect on that patient population. Okay. So it's very similar to that.
Well, you got a big job, man.
There's definitely some complexity.
I just like seeing resumes around stuff.
We say it's a long game. It's a long game.
That is, man. That's impressive, actually. The number of variables and the length of your foresight in that kind of process. That's, but I guess that's the nature of healthcare in general.
It is. Yeah, it is. And so, I think that sometimes catches startups off guard, if you will.
Yeah.
Right? So like venture capitalists will invest a lot of money.
Yeah, they got 3-4 years to get results, and then
and the reality is commonly it just takes longer than that.
Sure.
Right? I'm
glad you guys survived. I'm glad and in fact, I'm glad you're thriving now. And then I think you alluded to some wins recently in your business.
We did. So we literally just did a press release today.
Okay.
Announcing that
So it's out there. Huh?
It's out there that we were selected for basically a national.
So I don't have to sit on this.
No,
I don't have to wait.
No. It's all in the public now.
Right.
It's selected with the veterans hospitals to basically be the software of choice to augment the radiologists for early lung cancer detection.
Wow, for the whole
the entire veterans hospital network.
Congratulations!
Very exciting.
That's a big award.
That is a big award.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's exciting in its own right. But there's sort of all kinds of secondary benefits, right? So one, it's a big win. But the other thing that is sort of less obvious is that commonly veterans hospitals are adjacent to major academic medical centers, and commonly the residents and the fellows that are doing their residency or fellowships actually do reading in the veterans hospitals, so they get exposed to our product.
Okay, so you're getting the next generation. This is like Coke and Pepsi and awards in the elementary school.
You're exactly right. That's exactly
what it is. You're teaching students how to use tomorrow's technology.
And when they go on, right, so they finish their education, they go
network your adoption
pull
as well.
through. Yeah.
Oh man, what a huge deal! Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and how I'm a veteran too, so I kind of paid attention to all the Happy Veterans Day stuff, and you're still seeing how interesting is it to get an award like that on the week of Veterans Day, right?
It's true. It's true.
That's
and
awesome,
in the month of lung cancer awareness.
Yeah,
right. It's perfect.
Stars are aligning, man. Is that signs from heaven or something? Well, no. What it is a ton of grit. You guys pushed through hard times for a decade.
We did,
and then saw yourself profitable, got more seed money, or more funding money rather, and then now you get this big award. That's awesome. So what's that mean for what's going to happen to you over the next couple of years?
So I think it just gives us the opportunity to grow faster, right? Okay. It gives us the opportunity to build more products because we can bring more research and development engineers into the mix.
Okay.
Right. So it just opens doors, right? So it creates new customers even outside the VAs. It creates obviously, a stronger balance sheet that
Sure.
allows us to hire more, allows us to build
You can
faster.
predict some income now and work around that as opposed to scraping and clawing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Now we can take that to other, other illnesses, other ailments, and
Yeah. You could
see
go.
how far you can go
You
with
could
that, right?
go. You could go into breast cancer. You could
Yeah.
go into colon cancer. You could go, and breast cancer today. I mean, that's another area where this artificial intelligence is just it's becoming the standard of care almost,
Mm.
right? So, you know, um, mammographers, they have the same issues as thoracic radiologists do, right? They're dealing with more and more data, right? They're trying because reimbursements tending to go down. So
Mm.
for hospitals to sort of maintain their kind of operating margin, if you will, there's more pressure to read faster, right? And
Those populations aren't struggling nearly as much with getting early screening done,
no,
that kind of
women are
thing. Like they
women are
sold that for a
women
long
are
time.
very good. Women, in general, they're just much more proactive with respect to their health.
Well, man, that's awesome. So the next couple of years, what's going to happen to your team? You guys going to get bigger? You going to build more offices, or
Yeah, so
I know you're guessing. Nobody knows the future.
no,
But
I think we'll grow as fast as talent allows us to grow.
yeah,
Right? So it's hard to find
like
talent.
everybody, that's going to be your constraint.
Yep, exactly. And so I don't think it's at all far fetched to think that we could be 2x the size we are now.
Yeah.
I think
I heard Twitter and Facebook just might have made some people available
that's
to
true.
you, right?
That's true. Maybe the market will loosen up a little bit, right? And then
Back to where it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, which was already 10-1, right?
that's
But
true.
yeah,
That's
it's going
true.
to be a challenge.
It won't solve the problem,
No.
right? It's just there's so much demand for
Good tech talent.
good tech talent.
Yeah. Well, like that's all the more reason to encourage young people to go into these, kind of STEM fields, whatever else. Now I'm getting in my own interests in this. It's not just about.
And unfortunately, we're falling behind in the United States, right? And that is not good for our future as a country, right? We
That's right.
yeah.
And it's not good for things that really matter, right? Like it's not just about selling more stuff, enjoying more video,
Quality of
more
life,
TV or whatever.
quality
else.
of
That's
life, and
longevity.
productivity,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera.
That
Yeah,
matters a lot. So
It does.
yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I look back. Some of it is like kind of I got a fanboy way about me. That's why I've stayed in this tech space for as long as I have because I love all the smart engineers and scientists and technologists who knew early on. I had a good friend in elementary school who would just he played video games on his box computer like before anybody knew what computers were. Like once a week we would go to computer lab and like move a turtle around with a couple of commands and stuff. Right?
I
It was
remember
a little
Pong.
triangle.
I remember Pong. That was one of my
It would say
favorite.
go forward and then right 90-degree right. And we programmed it to do this stuff. And I didn't go that path, but I had this friend who did. And everybody thought he was a nerd. And he was kind of a nerd, but man, I bet you he's doing great now, right? So, I look back on that sometimes and I think, wow, I wish I'd have stuck with it. So I feel lucky to be kind of in this tech adjacent space where we just get to talk and listen and help smart people do what they do.
And engineering, and it's interesting from the standpoint. Obviously, it's technical, but there's an element of creativity to it, right? You kind of you sort of create your own path, right? And so I think that's unique, right? And I think there's a lot of satisfaction,
Yeah.
right? When you build something, and not everybody, including myself, is mechanically inclined, right? And so, software, you don't need to be mechanically inclined,
Just
right?
different tools.
It's different, yeah.
I've told you, like I hung these doors on my office, right? Like I told you, I'm kind of a do-it-yourselfer.
So you are mechanically
kind of,
inclined.
yeah. But you know what? I mean, software and engineering is. My son's an electrical engineer, right? And it's just you're just a builder with different tools. Is all it is, right? Different tools,
100%.
different materials. So anyway, I applaud you guys for what you're doing. It's really cool.
Well, I appreciate the conversation. We're pretty excited about the future.
Yeah. Congrats on the VA award. That's huge for not just Riverain, not just veterans, but really the whole world, right?
I think so.
I mean, like, don't mean to be dramatic about it or whatever, but it's nice to have made.
Well, I think everyone recognizes that we owe veterans something, right? And what's more important than health?
Yeah, like
Right?
let's not let them die yet.
Right, exactly.
So anyway, congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks for doing this recording with me.
That was fun. You're very good at it. It's very relaxed conversation.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thanks for the early feedback too. We'll see how the lights helped, and obviously we gotta go kick Alexa out of the room. Thanks for listening to Being Built. I'm Aaron Davis, your host and the founder of Reckless Tech. Contact us to find the talent that you need to build a winning team.